This is your first one this year, is we will start the meeting by providing you with some information through a shorter than it was this morning slide deck. And then we have 5 questions. We have either an administrator or a board member assigned to each question. You will get an opportunity to respond to each question. So what we'll do is we'll have you spend a certain number of minutes at one table, and then we'll have you rotate to the next table so that you get to talk to each of the people who's taking notes and add your information. We are going to collect these notes. We will share them out with the community. We will also give them to the board because they are going to have a meeting on April 15th, a special meeting to further discuss input for the budget process as the district works on that for next year. We also did a survey over the weekend into today, asking people similar questions to the ones that we're asking you. We will share some of that data tonight. We also have 75 separate, we had 98 responses, 75 different responses to the open-ended question. So I'm not putting all 75 of those in the slide deck. You can take a big deep breath. But we will share those out to the community so everybody can see what everyone said. No names attached. And the board will also have access to those as they're making considerations for the direction they give us to go forward. So welcome. I am Dana Rosenbach. I'm the superintendent. Dan King, who is the assistant superintendent, will also be helping with the presentation. When we get to the tabletop part of the night, we will have each person at each table, at least the first table, introduce themselves to you, and then those people running those tables will manage that conversation for the rest of the evening. So that we have Nicole Gonzalez-Timmons from the board back at question number 3. We have Arla Shepard-Bull at question number 2. Amber Nygaard at question 1. Leanna Krotzer is back at question 4. And Eric Youngberg is at question 5. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump in to our information part of the night. I guess while Dan's doing that, I should also be really clear. What we're gathering tonight is input to get a deeper understanding of what's important to our community as we have to consider some very difficult decisions, and that we can use that information both from tonight and from this survey to help guide the decisions that we make for the 25-26 year budget. So the reason that we're having this meeting is that we had a levy election in February that was unsuccessful, and that means that we have to look at our budget going into the following year and make some adjustments. So the reason that we have levies in Washington State is the state defines basic education, and they have a pretty strict definition that does not include everything that we need to do in school for our kids. So since 2018 with the McClary decision, they define anything outside of that box as enrichment. Now that may not be things that we see as enrichment, because often that means additional support teachers where we get some funding, for example, for special education or multilingual learners. We have a lot more staff to meet the needs of our students than the state funds. So positions like that, things like elective classes at the high school, things like sports and activities. There will be a lot of them, we'll talk about them later through the discussion, but the state does not fund everything we need to do, and unfortunately that's why we continue to need levies in Washington. And one thing I will, and we'll be clear, switch it, as we go through, we really work hard in North Mason to not take advantage of our community when we do that. We really plan and spend a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what we actually need to get the job done and no more. And that's the figures that we use to craft our request from the community for a levy. So we are unusual in Washington in that our levy request has not ever been the maximum amount we are allowed by law to request in our state or for our district. We've been very, very careful to look at what do we really need and only ask for that because we're trying to be respectful of the pocketbooks of our community members so that when we have their support, we can continue to have it going forward. So things that levies fund, as I said, are things like those on the slide up front. It includes extracurricular activities. It includes staffing costs outside of the state funding model. And we've included just some of the things there. So elementary specialists, music, PE, art, those are not funded outside of a specific part of the model. Secondary band, choir, and drama. Part of that is funded, part of it isn't. School nurses, we're funded for a very small portion of the school nurses that we have, although at least the state is seeing the importance in that. And in both that and counselors, the apportionment for that is growing to get closer to what we currently have in North Mason, but still doesn't quite cover it all. Library techs, custodians, and we'll give you an example on that later of how many we have as opposed to how many the state funds. And substitute teachers, we're funded for substitute teachers for 3 days a year per funded staff member. So I have more specific numbers later in the presentation, but let's just say I have 300 or 100 teachers, then we get 300 days for all the 100 teachers that the state funds, and we have 139, and I don't think the state funds 100 teachers. Dan will provide that information a little later, but for ease of numbers, let's say that. And we get 3 days of sub pay at less than we pay for subs for those teachers. Teachers have in their contract 12 sick days a year. They also have personal days, and they need to use those days often for very good, they don't use them frivolously. But we get funded for 3, they get more than that. That's already really obvious, an issue there. So the levy is one of the things, is the way we have to make up for that when we need to pay for all the days people are out. Also, there are administrative costs beyond the prototypical funding model. That includes administrators, that includes support personnel in the offices, in the district office, in the school offices. That includes support in our departments like maintenance and food service and transportation. Technology is not fully funded. The level of technology that both our staff and our students need to learn in the current learning environment is not fully funded. And maintenance, curriculum, all of the things on the list. So there are, even on the bottom one, transportation is unique. Transportation and food service do have separate funding streams. However, transportation is only funded for to school and from school to home once a day for our students. So if we have middle of the day bus routes, and we do have some for things like preschool or going down to Feller for science activities, or going to West Sound Tech, or going on field trips, or going to sporting or band competitions, or all of those things. Those are either funded by the groups that support those or by the levy, because those are not funded by the state. Okay? All right. We wanted to include, just for your information purposes too, and a lot of this is information we have shared in different ways over the year with the board or the committee or on our website, and all of this will be available. But we wanted our folks to see, compared to some of our local neighbors, where are we right now with how we compare with the collections in those districts for bonds, EP&O levy, which is the levies for additional capital projects levies that some people have. Some people do a transportation levy, not in our region, as you can see. But the costs for each of those, and then the total costs by district. And we are the blue line towards the bottom of that chart, and it's listed in order of expense per $1,000 of assessed valuation. So our current year's budget is $44,524,338. Doing the math without the levy and with the decrease in enrollment that, as opposed to planned enrollment that we experienced this year, our total reduction needs to be $4.6 million to bring next year's budget to just under $40 million. And we've looked at how we target that, and this is kind of to show you a simplified version of the map that got us there. Dan, you want to explain this piece?
Yeah, I'll do my best, and it's small. I know it's hard. So, the funding gap for enrollment loss. We had enrollment loss this year, meaning when we started this year, before the year started, we had a projected enrollment, and we based this year's budget on that for our general fund because the enrollment drives our apportionment. And our enrollment was 76 students lower than what we budgeted for. Now, approximately 85% of our budget is in staffing. And so when you start the school year, we really don't know what our true enrollment is in September or August. They start at the end of August. We really don't know until October because it takes a while for us to realize which students are coming and which ones are not. We have learning starts starting a little later. Transition to kindergarten starts a little later. So it's really not until October when we do our count that we have our enrollment. So by then, we already have our staffing locked in. We have people with contracts. So we realized our enrollment was 76 students lower. That was about $1.3 million in expected revenues that we weren't going to be getting based on that enrollment reduction. We did do an apportionment adjustment for enrollment so that we wouldn't get over apportioned as we go through the year and have to pay that back. But we've been having to survive on less than we planned. So there was that, and then the loss of the levy, because so our current levy is $3.8 million. So we'll get half of that next, not exactly half, but we'll get a portion of that next school year, but we're going to miss out on, if I can remember, about 2.1 million of that we won't get next year. So we're just going to get a portion of that 3.8 million next year. So we're accounting for the levy loss and the apportionment reduction that we need to make up for. So that's 4.2 million. And how we're going to make that up is through projected personnel expenses.
So that middle line, we know that all of our personnel, all of our bargaining units have contracts that they get additional pay for additional years of experience. We also have open contracts that we have to try to plan for if we negotiate with the union and there's any kind of raise involved. We also know that our current contracts say that, and the state gives additional dollars for kind of a cost of living, but it's not equivalent to inflation. It's a number the state makes up, and there is a federal number called the IPD, but the IPD that the state uses to give us our budget is a number that they choose. Sometimes they tie it to a real IPD inflationary factor, and sometimes they pick a random number, which is what they've done in recent years. For this coming year and the year after, it looks like they're actually using the real number and not a number that they make up, so at least that's something we can work with and count on. But so those next two lines show that we know that we can project how much more our existing personnel would cost us based on contracts. And then the third line is how much more we can plan on getting from the state based on where they are right now in their process. So that adds another 1.6 to the expenses that we're looking at that are over this, where we need to be, but also subtracts 1.2 for the additional state dollars. So instead of looking at reductions in our budget of 4.2 million, we're looking at 4.6. So you go.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, approximately 85% of our budget is in staffing. And that's very typical in Washington. We're not different in having that much of our budget being for staffing purposes. So this is just a little bit of an example, though, of how the funded amount for different positions doesn't match where our actual needs are. So, for example, with the position of principal, this is principal and assistant principal. We have 9 in the district. We're funded for 6.643. So we're not funded for this additional 2.357. We are approximately 74% funded by the state for our principal positions. With certificated teachers, we have 139 total positions. We're funded for 109.869. That's a difference of 29. So we're 79% funded for our teaching staff. Now, one might question, well, if you're not funded for that much, then don't hire that many. Well, we look at our realized needs based on our enrollment, the amount of students we have, and the amount of staff support it requires to teach all of our classes, to keep classes where they need to be, to make sure we have the certificated people in the right classrooms and whatnot. For example, we mentioned before, elementary music, elementary art, elementary PE, those kinds of things. We value those, we need those, so we can really give a whole child education. And so we include those positions, so it takes more to do that. So that's just one reason why our staffing is higher.
And another piece there are certain positions that we're required to have that aren't fully funded. So as a lot of the things we'll talk about are, we have a lot of requirements from the state that we lovingly call unfunded mandates, things that we are required to do that the state gives us no dollars to do. So, go ahead.
Thank you. So those are just a couple examples on the certificated side, principals and certificated teachers. On the classified side, here are a couple more examples. We have custodians, we have 14 in the district. We have a lot of facilities. We really try to keep them clean and well cared for. It takes that level of custodial support to accomplish that. We also have a stadium and a lot of facilities that require that. For cleanliness, for hygiene and all of that. We're funded for 7.89, and that means we're unfunded for 6 of those positions. So we're 56% funded for our custodial staff. Paraeducators, this one is pretty interesting. We have 46. We're funded for 3.876. Okay, and we have many, many critical, important needs for those paraeducators, especially when it comes to supporting students with IEPs. And students have units for paraeducators supporting their IEPs. So by law, we have to fulfill that. So we're required to have those positions. So we're only 8% funded there. Security, we have 3, we value them. They're utilized every day, supporting all across the district, every site within our district. They try to have a presence, and they're really valuable employees. We have 3, we're funded for 0.376. So we're 13% funded there. Those are just some examples. We can go further. There's many, many more where our actual needs do not match what we're funded for.
So this is kind of just another way of looking at that. So we looked at 4 main categories of places we're going to have to look at reductions, and those include administration, they include classified employees, they include certificated positions, and MSOCs, and you've got the notes on there. So of those percentages, are, like, for example, we currently, those costs are very similar, so we're at 3.4% with admin. We're trying to allocate those to each group based on the size of those groups right now. The one thing that is important to point out, we said roughly 85% of our budget is staffing. Part of that MSOCs is also people, because that includes positions that are funded through contracts with contractors, like our school psychs and those kinds of things. So that raises that percentage.
I'm sorry, could you just define MSOC for those who don't speak school district?
Maintenance, supplies, and operating costs.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, I'm sorry. I get so wrapped up in using that word all the time.
And as Dana mentioned, so we do have some staffing that is what falls under MSOCs because of purchase services. So we're paying for a service. So it falls under the MSOCs. So some of those, for example, would be speech and language pathologists, school psychs, the nurses, those kinds of things.
So one of the things we wanted to do, and Dan put this together, so I'm going to let him talk about it, but a little earlier we showed you kind of where we compare with area districts with what we collect in our levies and bonds. We also wanted to show you the costs of some of our people comparatively to districts in our area, and we also needed to take into account that positions are funded in since the McCleary decision according to a regionalization model. And the regionalization model starts with a baseline number that's called the 0% number, that every district gets at least that much per funded positions. And as you saw, they don't fund all the positions. So if they give us 74% at our given level, okay? And so Shelton, all of the other districts in Mason County except for North Mason are at, no, except for North Mason and Hood Canal and Pioneer, I think, are at the 0% level, okay? We are at 12%. Another district in our region that is at 12% is Peninsula School District. All of the Kitsap districts are at 18%. So that means for us, we get the zero level plus 12% of that to fund each position. And that's based on a calculation that the state does based on the cost of housing in your community. And so the rest of Kitsap County is at the highest available level now, which is 18%. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say a little bit more. So this is just some examples, some of our neighboring districts. And many of our staff live in some of these neighboring districts and commute to North Mason to work. But just to give you an example, so the base amount of allocation for a principal, that means there's no additional for regionalization, for this school year is $116,900. 92. That's the state funding for a principal. And then you can see in Shelton, the average principal is making $164,535. Now, the state funding plus the 12% regionalization amounts to $130,023. So that's what North Mason would receive for each building administrator. And the average North Mason principal is $157,144. And Peninsula, also at 12%, their average salary for a principal is $170,409. And then a principal funding level for a district that's at 18% regionalization, their base is $136,989. North Kitsap average principal salary is $183,005. Bremerton $163,370, and South Kitsap $171,007. So you can kind of see where North Mason kind of compares to some of these neighboring districts. And then with certificated teachers, the funding level base is $78,209, and Shelton is paying their highest at the top of their salary schedule for highest paid teachers, $113,964, and their average is $81,325. North Mason, with our 12% regionalization, gets $87,594 for a teacher. Our highest at the top of the salary schedule, those are teachers with 16 plus years and a lot of education, masters plus 90. Did I say that right, Nate? MA plus 90.
Yeah.
So that's 123,476. The average is 85,068. Now I must say we have a lot of veteran teachers that have experience, which is great. It's good to have veteran teachers, but they're middle to high. They're falling above this 85,000, a majority of our teachers. Peninsula, high end is 125,872 with their average at $85,002. Districts with a regionalization of 18%, 92,287 is the allocation. Their highest paid 133,13. Bremerton's highest paid 125,872. South Kitsap 129,362. And the averages there, North Mason 92 plus, 87 plus, 89 plus, 88 plus. So you can kind of see where we fall within and where, how we compare. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. What do you need to
Let's speed this
talk a little
up.
faster so you get more time to
All right,
talk?
I'm going to just tell you, this one real quick is just average hourly pay rates for this year in some of these classified positions. So you can see with paraeducator in North Mason compared to these other districts, for a custodian, average hourly rate, and security, average hourly rate.
So I'm going to show you really quickly in the next 4 slides, pictorial representations of some of the responses from the survey we did over the last several days. We had 98, one more, we had 99 total responses. And of those, we had set, when we get to the, I'll wait till we get there. So the first question was, did you vote? And as you can see, 63% in the recent levy election, 63% said they did vote, 18% said they didn't, and 18% preferred not to say. Next question. We also asked a very broad question, and the questions you will ask tonight will hopefully get us a little more, or answer tonight, get us a little more detail around this. When it comes to school programs, how much do each of the following matter to you? From the dark orange, extremely unimportant, to the darker purple, extremely important. And you can see that really a lot of these things are very important to our community members who answered the survey. Next. We also asked for folks to share with us what they value most when it comes to student educational experience. So 35 of the people responded answered student. So that's why in the word cloud, student is the biggest word that's representative of the answers. Safety and security, a variety of programs and classes that students can enrich their experience. Safety, well-rounded social life and skill lessons, a place to develop into young adults. So we do have connected to this that when we publish that, you can see all of the 75 responses. They're all anonymous, so you can see what people said. Yes, Dan. And then we asked also, if the school board were to choose a new date to run the replacement levy, which would you prefer, August, November, or no preference? 46% said August, 38% had no preference, and 16% chose November. And just for your information, because you'll need this when you're thinking about answering question number 5, which also asks your opinion about if the school board should choose to run a replacement levy again, which date should they choose, August or November? In order for them to run the August levy, which takes place, the election is August 5th, the board would have to pass a resolution to do that by May 2nd, so not very far away. In order to do it for November 4th, they have until August 5th to pass that resolution. So the next up is table discussions. If you're not currently at a table, after we just review directions a little bit, please join one of the tables. You will get to answer all the questions. We can